by SIBA Podcast, our AW podcast. We are very excited today. We've got such a great topic and amazing speakers today that has joined us here. I've got Sarah Berger, a partner at Bradley, Conradie, Holton, Cheadle, BCHC, and Bradley Conradie, also a partner at BCHC, with us today. My name is Leona van der Merwe, technical consult at SIBA, and today we're really going to dive into a conversation that hits at the very core of our responsibilities as professionals in finance, in law, and in governance. We won't be analyzing the legal specifics of the University of Fort Hare case, but we will use it as a powerful and pressing backdrop, one that forces us to examine what happens when institutions starts to crumble under the weight of corruption. Joining me today, we've got two amazing individuals who have really been instrumental in helping the public and the profession understand the stakes involved. Bradley, Sarah, thank you for both being here. We are really honored to have your voices in this discussion.
Thank you, Leona.
Thank you very much.
So if we just look a little bit, public institutions, especially universities, are meant to be guardians of truth and builders of futures. But what happens when these institutions are compromised? What are the warning signs? What is the governance failures? And the personal risks faced by those who choose to speak out? In our session today, we are really unpacking the ethical dilemmas, the professional responsibilities, and the consequences of silence. As always, this is not about sensation. It's about systems, safeguards, and the people inside these systems. So let's just delve into some detail. Bradley, I want to ask you first, in large institutions, what are some of the common red flags that finance professionals should be trained to spot? And more importantly, why are these so often overlooked or dismissed, even when the evidence is staring us right in the face?
Thanks, Leona. Very, very important question. My answer to it is based on vast experience, almost 30 years of working in the public sector as well as the private sector. The problem does seem to be more in state institutions. We've been attorneys and investigators at several universities and other state-owned institutions. And I think it's important to mention that because over time, these red flags, well, at least to us, have become very, very apparent. And when we go from one client to the next, we see exactly the same things happening. So for us, some of the common red flags, the minute we arrive at a client, normally asked to investigate with a view to disciplinary action or civil recovery of monies that have been stolen, is that we often find that there's a lack of separation of duties. The concentration of financial control is in the hands of a few employees. And that is not just poor planning or poor management. What we find is that it is by design, that the system is set up that way, so that those that want to steal from universities and engage in other unlawful activity have full control over what is happening. We also find very common is the bypassing of procurement policies. And here we're talking about when institutions revert to emergency or sole source contracting without any proper justification. And sometimes there is justification, but sadly, it is seen as an opportunity to advance a criminal cause. So, for example, we all know about the PPE scandal, where money was just made available because it was urgent. So there's a genuine emergency, but those that are dishonest immediately set about contacting their friends and family members and dished out billions of rands to these people via the emergency sourcing. And what we also find is that if you move from one institution to another, you'll often find that it's the same or similar service providers and people who get called in to provide the PPE equipment or the generators during load shedding, for example. Other things that is also important is where you see regular late adjustments to financial reports or unexplained variances. So what we have seen is, and we're talking to auditors here, you know this better than we do as lawyers, but when you reach the end of the financial year, there's a cutoff, and employees hold back on submitting invoices, which they can't really justify. And you go through this crazy period where you just want to reach financial year end. And normally you may have a week or two after financial year end to process invoices. It's during these periods that certain individuals will come forward and in that madness push through their invoices for approval. Then there's the repeated use of the same contractors. And you normally find that there are no clear deliverables. If you go and ask for the work product that was produced, you either can't get anything, or when you do get it and you study it, you can't understand. And I'll give you an actual amount here. You can't understand why 1.3 million rand was spent on a report. And a little bit of further investigation shows you that someone just simply cut and paste a document off the internet. So one needs to be able to almost immediately see that, for example, a legal opinion that costs R1 million, that's outrageous. No attorney or advocate should be charging that amount of money unless it's extremely complex. So that should be a red flag to interrogate further. What was this matter about? Who all was involved with it? Where are the source documents? Who is this advocate? What is their standing within the profession? Those will all be give you answers to the questions which will come to mind. And then you also find that there's resistance to independent audits or information requests, where you'll persistently ask someone to give you information, and they'll tell you, we're going to give it to you, don't worry, it's on its way, we'll email you, and it just never comes. So I think the next question, so those will be the main red flags for me, but it does lead to the question, why does this happen? Some people say you get what is called compliance fatigue, where you have your controls, they exist on paper, but they're not actively enforced. And that is because, people have just had enough of having to answer questions. It's almost like, when you need to fill in another FICA form. Personally, it drives me insane when I have to do that. Other important reasons are, and this we know firsthand, it's fear of retaliation, victimization, and of course, damaging your career should you ask the wrong questions or should you probe too hard. There's also, unfortunately, in South Africa, there's a culture of silence in many workplaces where questioning is almost seen as disloyal and unacceptable behavior. And what we have found is that when you go into certain departments and you understand the history of those departments, you'll find that the people have been recruited from the same area, same town, village, city, whatever the case may be. And they've been systematically brought in over a period of time. And part and parcel of that is you've got to do what we tell you to do. And worse than that, the people that are brought in almost accept that this is what I must do and that I'm entitled to do it. And that is why we have across the country a culture of criminality, a culture of corruption, because it comes right from the top. If your leadership in the organization is engaging in a free for all, you can be assured that in every single department, the same system is being put in place, and people almost break up state institutions into territories. So right on top, you steal in the hundreds of millions, and right at the bottom, and we've done lots of work in this area, the secretary is busy making 10, 15,000 rand extra a month through some catering scam that she's running. And everybody knows that it is happening. You just don't question it. There's also, I think, with institutions, an over-reliance sometimes on external auditors without holding the internal auditors accountable, or frustrating the internal accountability mechanism, which means that they can't effectively do their job. And by the time that your members arrive, there hasn't really been any significant work done by the internal colleagues, because their jobs are also difficult to do, and they are also subject to this culture of fear and intimidation. I think I can leave it there at this stage.
Sure, Bradley, thank you very much. I'm listening to you, and I think the first thing that popped up to mind and that I was thinking as you were talking about segregation of duties, you were talking about cutoff, you were talking about the reasonability and materiality of certain expenses, and it was taking me back to my varsity years, which were many, many years ago, and those are what we used to call auditing 101.
Yes.
Segregation of duties. That was the first thing. And I'm referring to auditing, but it wasn't an audit concept. It's a finance concept. So if you're a CFO or a manager or a director in an organization, segregation of duties is not just something that is an audit term or aspect. It's something that should form part of an organization. And I think what is worrying and shocking for me is that you commented and said that it's not necessarily a failure, but the system might have actually been designed that way. And
Absolutely.
that's the scary part for me. It's one thing, when somebody turns around and say, oh, we missed this one, we should have put an extra person or a different person in. But if it was designed up front with the knowledge and awareness that this shouldn't be happening, and it is happening. And then you touched on the why, which was going to be my follow-up question. So thank you so much for touching on it. And you talk about the compliance fatigue. I'm just wondering, how do we fix it? And everything you said, I mean, when you speak about corruption from the bottom up down to the top, it's not just sitting in one place. And it's, it always comes to the age-old question that we in the profession ask, and we discuss this often: is ethics something that you can teach someone? I don't know. Is ethics something you can teach someone, or is it integral into who you are?
Yeah, well, I think we need a cultural and ethical reawakening in South Africa. That is what is required. And Sarah and I have had debates with people in several matters, and we get surprised when we hear answers like, but what is wrong with it? I gave the job to my sister, who should have earned 300 Rand a day, but we paid her 2,500 Rand. She also has the right to earn a living. Don't take the food out of my mouth. Now, what that tells me is that your societal norms and values have broken down. And it's been broken down because you do not have ethical leadership right on top.
Sure. Bradley, now you've spoken a little bit about the internal audit and the internal audit function and the external auditors. Where do you think the audit committee fits in here? So audit committees and the accountants who serve on them, or the professionals who serve on them, it's not just accountants, are often positioned as a critical line of defense. How can they strengthen their role in preventing this systemic governance failures? Do you think that they can have an impact? And is there something that they can do, or do you think the problem is just wider than that?
I think there's definitely something that they can do, and a lot of work has gone into that over the years. But I think more so in the private sector than in the public sector. Not that the private sector is immune from the problems that we face in as a country, but we have seen our fair share of audit committee failures, and where that has happened, we've also seen that it is as a result of bringing in specific people to serve on the audit committee, to be part and parcel of the bigger scam or criminal system that is in place. So if we can put our people on the audit committee, then we've got control at that level as well in terms of what type of questions are taking place. So I would say one of the most important things is that there's a proper review of who serves on these audit committees. Now, it's not easy in a university context, because what happens is a university council is made up of various stakeholders, from people appointed by government via the Minister of Higher Education, students, academic staff, I think the local municipality, the Premier's office, and you then get your people appointed onto council, and from council you get them appointed onto audit committees. And once they're on the audit committees, you have broad oversight of what is happening in the institution, which you ordinarily would not have as far as day-to-day operations are concerned. But you begin to see budgets. So all of a sudden you see that this institution operates off a, let's say, 1.5 billion rand operational budget a year, just over 100 million rand a month. And people with criminal intent then start thinking about, how do we access some of that money? So if you've got the wrong people on the audit committees, they're not doing any substantive interrogation of risk. They're sitting on those committees and they are trying to find out as much information as possible. To answer your question in a more practical way, and to move from the personal problems that I mentioned, there can't just be a tick box exercise by these audit committees. They need to focus on substantive interrogation of risk. It's not just about compliance. So they need to ask questions, to demand access to full internal reports. Don't just rely on summaries. You've got to, particularly in the public sector, you've got to monitor the fruitless and wasteful expenditure and the irregular expenditure, because what you'll find there are trends which will go from one year to the next. And we are speaking now in a university environment, which doesn't fall under the Auditor General. It falls under private auditors, if I can call it that. But you'll see in these reports, and your members will know this, that you'll flag fruitless and wasteful expenditure and irregular expenditure, and you come back the following year, and there you see exactly the same companies involved, used very little explanation or justification. And it's for the audit committees to intervene and to ask the questions as to why it is we find ourselves year in and year out in exactly the same position. The other problem is that there needs to be proper independence and objectivity. So the audit committee, there needs to be a proper distance from day-to-day management. Avoid those close relationships which we know develop in many of these institutions. So that is definitely something that must be guarded against, because the minute you got people on the audit committee involved with operational managers on a friendly basis, then it brings you back to what I said in the beginning, where they can then work together to achieve their objectives. And I think what is important is that the audit committee members must ask the difficult questions, and not be afraid to do so, not be afraid to be confrontational, not be afraid that you're going to lose your position and the following year, or whenever there's a change of audit committee. Afraid you're going to lose the fee that you get for attending to your duties. And I also think what is important is that there must be proper skills and capacity building. Once again, in the sector that we speak in, are we putting the right people onto these audit committees? Or are we putting, as I've suggested earlier on, our comrades onto those committees so that they can further our cause? There needs to be continuous training for these members. And I know in a private company, you will seek out people that have strong experience in finance, preferably find chartered accountants or auditors, people that have worked at other universities at senior levels, and you'll put them on the audit committee. That is not always the case. And I would go as far as saying very seldom the case when it comes to educational institutions and other state-owned entities. So training is required on issues like fraud detection, and also something that you raised earlier on, ethical leadership. Don't just train people on financial standards. We need to start training people on what is ethical leadership and why it is important that we show ethical leadership when we take on these positions. These are extremely important positions. They're the safety net of any business or organization. And if it's failing at that level, it becomes difficult for your members when they come in to almost conduct an audit in the absence of proper information, and where things are being hidden away and not properly checked. You come in once a year, you do your audit, but you're not there every day to see what is happening operationally. So your audit committee needs to be there to ensure that from a day-to-day regular operational point of view, that they are already exposing problems, and to raise those problems proactively with the auditors. Don't wait until the auditors come and ask questions. Contact them and say, this is what we've discovered. You are the auditors. Should we be concerned about this? And that type of intervention may lead to addressing some of the problems before it even becomes a problem. Then I think what else can be done by these committees is we need to have a proper look at these whistleblower channels that are available. There are many good ones, but there are also companies and organizations that put ones in place that it's, you can make a phone call or send an email and you can almost have your rant, but then that's the end of it. What is the status of your whistleblowing system that you've put in place? Do you have forensic investigators and accountants contracted? Do you have someone that is able to work through the complaint and to be able to decide that this is actually serious and it requires further probing, either internally or externally? And is that type of information being brought to the audit committee along with what the outcomes of the investigations are? So I definitely think that is something that needs to be looked into, particularly in the context of corruption in South Africa. I'm gonna leave it at that point.
Thank you so much, Bradley, for all that insight. It just makes me think back a couple of weeks ago, we had a CPD at SIBA, which we actually did a CPD on directors' duties. And I know it's very different from the audit committee. And we had so much feedback and comment after it that people came back and said, I didn't know this is what's required of me when I'm a director of a company. And it comes back to the education.
Yes,
And we are always teaching and going out and saying, do not take assignments and roles that you don't have the skills and knowledge and experience for. Um, and that's the core for me of the profession. And it doesn't mean if you don't have the skills and knowledge and experience today, you'll never have it. But upskill, develop, continuously develop, and then you'll get to that point.
correct.
So thank you so much. Bradley, I'm going to give you a little bit of a
Thank you.
break. Sarah,
Hello.
um, thank you for waiting so patiently in the wings for us. Um, Sarah, I think when we look, sometimes we read in news articles about attorneys' trust accounts and freezing of these trust accounts. It looks like a very extraordinary step. And it's not something we often see, but I do feel like it's coming out more and more often in the media. I don't know if it's just a little bit of overemphasizing on it, or if it is something that happens more regularly currently. And what does this kind of action suggest about the legal system's stance on professional accountability in high risk cases, and just your view on this?
Well, generally, what you'll read about when attorneys' trust accounts get frozen is that the Legal Practice Council will step in because there have been some sort of a misconduct on the part of the legal practitioners. Now, in the context of what we're speaking about today, I will say something that is very well known to the public, but apparently not law enforcement in our case. Is that firstly, we are not a company. And somehow law enforcement believe that we are an incorporated firm, but we are actually always and still to date a partnership. Now, in our context, and some people will know this from the media articles from the University of Fort Hare, that we've recently had a restraint order placed against us and our business, BCHC. However, I just want to comment on that first of all. Attorneys are the only people that can run trust accounts in their practice. You need a Fidelity Fund certificate in order to run the trust account. A non-attorney cannot run the trust account because firstly, they are not an attorney, and second of all, they do not have that Fidelity Fund certificate. And it would place it's first of all, it's unlawful. It goes against the principles of the Legal Practice Council, and it would place us at immense risk. So we do not believe that the decision, first of all, to put a restraint on BCHC would be a lawful restraint. But going back to your original point about other attorneys being placed under restraint, often cases you will see inexperienced or attorneys that simply have no regard for the practice or perhaps no experience or no understanding of how to manage those trust accounts being put into a position of extreme trust, just as the name trust account is positioned. And they are managing funds for their clients, and they don't know, or they may know, not to touch those funds for any reason at all, unless you've passed an invoice and it's for legitimate purpose. Now, attorneys get audited on those accounts at random as well. And if you make the slightest error in those trust accounts, you have to immediately account for that to the LPC and explain what has happened in that instance. So our situation is a little bit different from what you often see in the sort of RAF claims and wills and estates where money is paid in trust and the legal practitioners dipping into those funds. So I do believe that what may transpire in our matter will be a novel point of law, as we will be defending it vehemently in court.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think it's quite important, just the reference that you made to trust accounts. We always say to people, be very careful. There's specific requirements, like you said, the Fidelity Fund certificate. I mean, we sometimes deal with members that deal with managing agents from body corporate perspectives that also deal with trust accounts. And then the first thing there is to make sure the Fidelity Fund certificates is in place and those trust accounts is separate, that it gets reported annually to the board. So yeah, it is quite a touchy subject. Bradley, back to you. We
Yes.
only gave you a quick breather. Now, this point I want to speak to you about is something that is worrying me the most. So, corruption in education specifically isn't just a matter of mismanaged funds. It really touches people's lives. What is the broader societal consequence when institutions like universities are implicated in systemic corruption? I mean, if I just think back about the last 30, 40 years, when we look at all major fraud and corruption and all of those, you read afterwards people that lost pension funds, people that commit suicide, people that lost families. And I mean, we're now looking at a university point of view, but it really isn't just about mismanagement of funds and maybe some people enriching themselves. It's got a societal impact. And if you can maybe just share with us, what are the broader societal consequences when institutions like universities are implicated in this systemic corruption?
I think it is an enormous impact on society. I'm just thinking back now. I went to university in the early 90s. And prior to that, I would walk or drive past UCT and I would look at it and I would say, what a beautiful place, because it represented to me a place of learning, a place of excellence, a place where dreams could come true, where lives could be changed. Unfortunately, I don't think people view universities that way anymore. And that's largely due to mismanagement across various universities. And I say that because it's become like a state institution in the sense that the appointments that are made for the wrong reasons of people in senior management. And you do not get an appointment unless the politicians are in full agreement that you should be running an institution. They can tell you whatever they want to about which systems they have in place. If you don't get along with the Minister of Education or Higher Education, the chances of you becoming a Vice Chancellor, for example, are extremely slim. So over the last 30 years, we have seen the status of universities extremely devalued. What comes with that, and in the respect of certain universities, is a devaluation of qualifications as a result of compromised academic integrity. Employers do not want to accept qualifications from certain universities, and that undermines trust in the academic achievements. You've got to go back to that student that aspires to go to university, particularly in South Africa, where we have massive youth unemployment, as well as youth disillusionment that comes with it. And now you get an opportunity to go to university. You also have the benefit, if you qualify, which I think most people generally do at certain universities, to get funding from NSFAS. You work hard, you do what is required of you, and by the time that you're done and you're a little bit wiser and you've been for hundreds of interviews, you discover that no one is interested in your degree because it's been devalued to such an extent due to the mismanagement of the university that you'd attended. And I know, even as an employer, historically, there are certain universities where you'd look at the name of the university and you just push the CV one side. And I know I'm not the only person that was involved in recruitment that would do that. And that may have had something to do with mismanagement at the institution, or it could just have been that the value of the qualification over a period of time and the graduates that came out of that institution, you've learned to not have the skills. So when you see University of X, you do not read any further. And it shouldn't be that way. And there was a time when I engaged with a law faculty at a university to pass that message on and to have discussions with the dean to say, historically, we'd use your people, your students, we'd employ them, but we can't do that anymore. Everyone's got a 95% pass mark for every course, but when it comes down to actually doing the work, they are unable to perform at the expected level. So you're destroying dreams of students in the process. You're giving them a piece of paper that they've sacrificed minimum of 3 years for, which is worth absolutely nothing. And that damages the sector as a whole. And I think it damages funding for universities, partnerships, and I've already mentioned employability. Remember, universities have lots of, or used to have lots of arrangements in place with other major universities around the world. And South Africa's universities, at least 20, 25 years ago, I mean, I'm not an educational expert, but I always knew that there were 2 or 3 universities in this country that were right up there with the best in the world. You'd have scholars and academics, professors coming to work here, to do stints here, and our people going to do the same at those universities. And if we continue in the manner that we are continuing, that's just not going to happen. No one's going to want to cooperate with you if you're an institution that's not worth associating with. So my biggest concern is the long-term arm, though, because corruption at universities doesn't only affect the present students, but it also affects future generations for obvious reasons. They pay the price for the fake degree or the poor education that's not worth the paper it's written on, that is received by students due to no fault of their own. They have the right to receive the best education possible, and that is what university managers should be focusing on. That is actually their job, to advance learning and to advance research. So it brings me back to accountability. Accountability is critical, and those that manage these institutions need to understand that ultimately they are accountable to ensure the success of the institutions. That is the mandate that is given to them.
Thank you so much, Bradley. I think I'm listening to you now, and I'm just going back to a couple of months ago. There was this article about young entrepreneurs or young learners in South Africa that's got degrees, and they're working in supermarkets, packing shelves, working behind the till, which there's no problem with. They're earning an honest living. But it's like you say, those guys went to university to get a specific degree because they had a dream. You know, this was what I was going to do. I was going to change my family. I was going to be the first in my family that have a degree and get a job in a corporate environment and follow through on it. And it's just not happening. And with the unemployment rate in South Africa, I think this is just making the problem so much bigger. It's sad. Sarah, I'm so glad we have you here today, because, sometimes the finance professionals and our members suspect fraud at clients or assignments that they've been asked to do. And if you can maybe give us a little bit of insight on what steps should they take to act ethically and responsibly, while also making sure that they don't place themselves in unnecessary personal or legal danger. And I think it's a fine line. But if you can maybe give us, I think a lot of time guys says, fine, something's not right here. What do I do now? And I think Bradley touched on it earlier. We live in a society where people are afraid to speak out. So yes, your views on this.
Look, I've spent a lot of time over the last 12 months thinking about this very question, because as professionals, as accountants and lawyers, we have a higher standard to live up to, and society also looks to us and expects us to act ethically and do things that are correct. And what I mean by that is that they expect us to stand on the front lines and fight corruption and expose it at great personal risk. But they don't realize, when I say they, society doesn't realize the risk that it does come with. As you and Bradley were discussing earlier, there is often a culture in institutions already deeply ingrained, where people have the silent rule. They all know what is going on. They all know the scams that are happening, but they are conditioned to either be quiet or complicit, or they're partaking in the scams. So it does make an auditor or a forensic auditor's job very difficult, because if you do interview people and you're not a detective, you can't, force confessions out of them like a CSI Miami. You're going to go more or less on what people are telling you. And when you look at your documents, it's not going to marry up. And then you are in an ethical dilemma, because you are running an audit or a forensic investigation for a client who's hoping that their audit is going to come out and get pushed through as quickly as possible as well. So you're mindful of all these dynamics, and then you have a professional and ethical duty. So I've been looking back, and I thought to myself, one of the points that the public don't understand is that as professionals, we act in good faith on our clients' instructions. So what would I have done differently? Well, I think one of the big things that I would do now in taking any instruction, or even being steeped in an instruction when I came across a suspicious transactions or so on, is to assess the continued relationship with that client. And I would assess that relationship, first of all, by practically assessing the risks, by consulting with my colleagues, especially if you're in a bigger auditing firm, or forensic colleagues, trusted forensic colleagues. And I would immediately document any concerns that I would have in writing. This is going to prove very valuable for Bradley and myself down the line, because I'm a stickler for putting things into writing. And I know that all the big accounting firms are as well. But it is so critical not to just have that call, but to put it into an email and say, hey, I have my concerns. There is, of course, the dilemma when it comes to financial professionals and fraud investigators and attorneys, that if you don't have a piggy bank of millions to carry you through potential unemployment, if you do get blown out of the water, then you're in a very difficult position. That's why I say it comes back to a moral and ethical decision that you have to take, but to manage the initial stages by documenting concerns, and even going to management and saying, look, this is what I've seen, and I don't think I can continue unless these people comply. You have to also be mindful, when you do have those suspicions in your mind, that you may well have senior management involved in potential wrongdoing, which is what unfortunately, there are allegations that we've now found in our own situation, and you've just been acting in good faith. But hopefully you are in an organization, and I say hopefully, where you do have trusted professionals around you that can weigh in and assist, as well as trusted law enforcement officials. And I say that it is on shaky ground, because we've also encountered the good and the bad in all of this. And you're going to have to, first and foremost, trust your instincts. So I know that that is a very grey answer, but very honestly, in South Africa at the moment, there is very little protection for whistleblowers. So the best advice that I could do is document, 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 and where there is any wrongdoing, lodge those complaints as soon as reasonably possible. I just wanted to add on, although this falls out the scope of my question, onto the last question that you mentioned to Bradley, or you asked him, sorry, about the impact of and the consequences of corruption in educational institutions on society as a whole. Leaders are bred in universities, and we cannot deny that, because the people that are graduating out of these political degree programs and so on go on to join political parties and go and, lobby to become leaders, etc. When you have somebody that is, not being taught properly, and the only thing that they're learning to do is corrupt practices from university level onwards, they're going to take that with them through the rest of their careers and lives, and they're going to continuously knit the moral fiber of our society, and that is a great concern. And it's going to lead to the country being completely morally bankrupt, because as it stands now, even with the bar set low on educational pass rates, we still have, sorry, even though the bar is set so low on the actual pass rates for matric and university degrees, we still have many that are not educated. So what you effectively have is quite a large chunk of the population which is not educated, and then another large chunk of corrupt leaders that are leading these uneducated people. And I say that in various walks of life. So it is a huge risk to our political sphere and our economic viability.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Now, you've spoken about morals, and we said whistleblowing is morally vital. But often it's professionally and personally devastating. I think, like the two of you have seen over your careers and in life and dealing with people. How can institutions and perhaps even professional bodies like us at SIBA better protect and support those who speak out?
It's a difficult and touchy topic, because, and I'm loath to draw on this, but, somebody might say, and I'll just use this as an example, somebody may go on to LinkedIn or Facebook or say something silly, and their entire careers get tanked, and all the connections that they once had, all the support that they once had is lost. And in a way, it's no different for a whistleblower, because we're not whistleblowers in the traditional sense, because we were doing a job and we were exposed then, and all of our investigations were exposed. But effectively, all the people that supported you during that time and said, rah, 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 go and fight corruption, disappeared because they're afraid of the consequences that come out with it. Now, what that means, the personal cost to Bradley and myself and family members, but more especially us as professionals, is that you are effectively very, very isolated and alone. And I said to my mom the other day, I think I might know what my grandmother felt during the war years ago. And my mom said, yes, that must be how it felt, except everybody was going through it together and you're standing alone. And so it does feel like you are going through a personal onslaught. And what would be really, really appreciated is if professional bodies could strip out and see the reality of what is happening in South Africa. Because when you explain it to somebody, they almost think that you sound crazy. They think that you are some sort of conspiracy theorist trying to explain what is happening to you and the personal cost that it goes with, because it's such an unbelievable story. I mean, they come and arrest you, they fly you up in a jet. Professional bodies strip you of your memberships temporarily, before your case is even going to trial. People view you with circumspect. And I think that given the South African context that we are in, and every day when you open up the paper and you see that people are personally being targeted, one needs to look at it from that lens first. What institutions tend to do is say, give us an explanation as to why. Now, that would be for a court, to flesh those things out. But what civil society must do is decide for themselves. And I'm not saying every institution must support, but civil society must come together and say, what is the personal cost of this person? Well, in our instance, we have lodged more than 20 criminal complaints. And we've drafted a proclamation to bring the special investigation into the university and engage them to bring them into the university. We drafted a portion of the extended proclamation so that the SIU could continue and extend their investigation. We've supported the Hawks and do to date. In fact, on the weekend, they asked me for something in matters relating to the university. And those should be triggers in civil society to say, guys, there's something going on here that is not ad idem. These things don't marry up. These people are arrested, but at the same time, they still continue to work with the SIU in East London, with the Hawks, the DPCI, and with the NPA in East London. So support is what is needed. And it could be in various forms, like the discussion today, just to elucidate and open people's minds to the fact that we are professional attorneys doing our jobs, and you, unfortunately, are exposed to the very, very same things, and perhaps even more fundamentally as an auditor, because you may sit there with the figures and people know that you're going to see the figures, and you're going to be the very first reporting line on those figures, especially if there's been no investigation by external investigators. So it is a dangerous field for us to be in, just to be professionals. And what we need to do is we need to stand together and not accept personal persecution against professionals and attorneys. And you need to look at the circumstances holistically. And I know that there are a lot of associations that are trying very hard to push through or emphasize the Protected Disclosures Act and bring more protections to whistleblowers. But in reality, we know what really works in South Africa. And that is when civil society stand together and say, no more. You cannot do this anymore. This is dirty, dirty politics. And that is why you have people like Outer that stand up and they get the results. And it's not just them. I know there are many, many more civil society organizations, but we need to be more accountable as South Africans and support these people and stop reading the articles on a Saturday night with thumbs down or thumbs up and actually actively get involved, whether it's by a donation or a repost or actually showing up for other people.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sarah. It sounds like it's a lonely road out there. As we wrap up, I just want to thank both of you for sharing your time, your insights, and your courage with us. I think what's clear from the discussion we had today is that while we may not always have the power to stop corruption alone, we each have the power to notice, to speak, and to act, especially when silence makes us complicit. To everyone listening out there, the Fort Hare case is still under review, but the lessons, they are already here. We challenge you to reflect on your own professional space. Where are the red flags? Where are the blind spots? And when it counts the most, will you choose integrity, even when the cost is high? Until next time, I'm Leona van der Merwe from SIBA. Thank you for joining us on our AW podcast. Thank you very much,